Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Keystone Center's independent science panels on the potential development of the Pebble mine. My name is Todd Bryan, and I work with the Keystone Center in Colorado. And this is the fourth in a series of independent science panels that are focused on the Pebble's environmental and socioeconomic baseline studies. We held a panel last October that was focused on more of the studies around geology, geochemistry, hydrology, water quality, fisheries, marine ecosystem, and socioeconomic cultural resources and subsistence uses. We had a couple of panels that we weren't able to do, a couple of the environmental baseline study chapters that we weren't able to review at the time, so we decided to try to do another panel around those sessions, and that's what we're here today to do today and tomorrow. So the baseline studies, as you probably know and are aware of, are the foundation for a lot of the planning and future decision making around the potential development of the Pebble mine. The Keystone Center got involved in this project back in 2008 and recommended to Pebble that an organization like the Keystone Center, which I'll say a little bit more about in a couple minutes, put together a series of independent science panels to evaluate the baseline studies. So we started down that path with Pebble and with some scientists that we've been working with that I'll go over in a couple minutes. And have initially needed to wait until the baseline studies were officially released for public review, which occurred in February of 2012. So the baseline studies have now been out for a little over a year. The panels today and tomorrow are focused on the studies related to vegetation, wetlands, wildlife, endangered species, and trace elements as they relate to wildlife. They're not actually focused on the mine plan itself. The mine plan, as you're well aware of, has not been released. Keystone Center is exploring the possibility of holding another panel around a mine plan when it actually is released. We don't know whether that will occur or when it will occur. But so these panels today are not focused on that. Today and tomorrow are not focused on a mine plan. They're really focused on evaluating the baseline studies. Before I turn the podium over to Charlotte McKay from Pebble to provide a background on the baseline studies, let me say a little bit more about the Keystone Dialogue on Pebble, the Keystone Center, some guiding principles for putting the panels together that we followed, some challenges that we faced, why we're doing it, because we get that question a lot, and finally a little bit about our agenda. This first slide is a slide that we use to describe how we see the role of the Keystone Center in this process. So one of the things that we found early on when we did a social assessment of talking to people around the region, is that for most people this was still a whether question. It wasn't a how question. So the Keystone Center is approaching this as a weather question, and this quote from Alice in Wonderland I think helps us frame that. So I'm going to keep this up here for a while in case there's any question about the Keystone Center's role, because this actually comes up a lot for us. As I mentioned, in late 2007, Anglo-American and Northern Dynasty, the two companies that form the Pebble Partnership, approached the Keystone Center and asked us if we could organize or establish some sort of a dialogue to engage the public in a civil discourse about the prospect of a large-scale mine in the Bristol Bay watershed. And after extensive communication with government officials, tribal and citizens around the watershed, we recommended that Pebble allow the Keystone Center to put together a series of independent panels, science panels, that were objective, transparent, that provided an objective and transparent scientific review of the studies themselves. And the Keystone Center also set forth terms for our independence and how we operate, which I'll say a little bit more about. And then we basically started the assessment process. So one of the things that we've learned in doing this is that putting together independent science panels to evaluate a large-scale mining proposal and baseline studies is something that hasn't really been done any place in the world to our knowledge. Industry doesn't often expose its science to an objective peer review process, and so that's one of the things that the Keystone Center was interested in seeing if we could actually carry out, and to see how people would respond to that if we did it. So that's kind of where we are in this whole process now. So we've faced a lot of challenges in putting this together. We faced challenges around the objectivity of the Keystone Center because Pebble is funding the Keystone Center to do this. We faced challenges around whether the science panels science panel members are actually working without compensation, and I'll say a little bit more about that. But because they're involved in this process and the Keystone Center is involved in this process, can the science panel members be truly objective in their reviews? We ran into challenges around whether what the Keystone Center was doing was competing with with EPA's assessment, and I can say a little bit more about that. They're two very different projects, and we faced legitimate challenges around a lot of the way that we're looking at the science, whether the information is accessible to the panel members. And is it accessible to the panel members in the same way that it's accessible to the public and things like that. Regarding our independence, the Keystone Center is following National Research Council policies. And the National Research Council works with the National Academies of Science, and they do independent scientific review request of Congress. And as some of you might know, that was a request that was actually made to the National Academies of Science about Pebble's baseline studies several years ago. And there was a budget, there was money allocated in the governor's budget, and it apparently wasn't used for that. But the Keystone Center is following basically the same process and following the same policies as the National Research Council would follow. One of those, there's two of them that are really sort of critical in how we operate. And one is that, as I mentioned, the science panel members are working without compensation other than travel expenses. And we pay travel expenses at federal government rates. So there's nothing extravagant about federal government rates. And the second policy is that the panel members, we're searching for panel members that don't have any bias or conflict of interest that we are able to find. And so one of the things that we've done is spend a lot of time trying to identify potential biases and conflicts of interest among our panel members, so to ensure their objectivity around that. So those are the two main ones. And they're extremely important to us because they ensure that the panels provide the most independent, objective, and unbiased review process. And so that's pretty much standard procedure. I also wanted to say a little bit about, because this is an important topic right now and timely topic right now, is that one of the challenges that we face is there's a perception, I think, that that what the Keystone Center is doing is duplicating, in a sense, what EPA is doing in EPA's assessment. There are some fundamental differences that we've actually explored quite a bit with EPA. And I want to just say a little bit about that because they're different enough, I think, that that there's no possibility that that they duplicate each other or that they necessarily compete with each other. If there are any other questions about this, we have EPA people here who can address those differences as well, in case I get it wrong. The Keystone Center is putting together independent science panels to review and evaluate Pebble's baseline studies that have been going on since 2004. EPA is looking at something very different. They're not looking at the baseline studies. One of the reasons, I believe, is because the baseline studies have not been peer-reviewed, which is actually one of the things that we're doing with baseline studies is through this panel process. But the timing is very different. So the EPA's assessment has been done over the last couple of years. We're actually doing these science panels now. So EPA also looked at existing ecological studies of the watershed. Pebble scientists have also looked at existing studies of the watershed, but have also done extensive field analysis, which has come out in our panel discussions. But those are some of the differences. So they're in a sense they're complementary processes. They don't duplicate each other or compete with each other. So and if there's any question about that, we can have a further discussion of that, because I think those are some of the fundamental differences. But I don't want to speak for EPA in this. So if that comes up, we can have that discussion. So the Keystone Center. Let me say a little bit about that. Keystone Center is a nonprofit organization that was founded in 1975 by Bob Craig. Bob Craig is an elderly gentleman now. He's what the Keystone Center would consider an elder. Bob has a history in Alaska that's sort of interesting. He was a member of the climbing team that did the first ascent of Devil's Thumb back in 1946. So that's quite a while ago. I think Bob was in his early 20s at that point. He also was on the first ascent. This was actually not a first ascent of Denali, but it's the first female ascent of Denali by Barbara Washburn and Brad and these other individuals. And this is actually the order that they ascended, and that was in 1947. So Bob was an incredible mountaineer, still skis almost every day, and lives in Keystone, Colorado. Was formerly the president of the Aspen Foundation, and in 1975 started the Keystone Center. And Bob started the Keystone Center when a lot of the federal environmental laws and policies were being passed. And the federal environmental laws and policies, as you probably are aware, contain this inherent tension between economic development and environmental protection. And Bob recognized the need for an independent nonprofit organization that brought people together to try to reconcile those tensions. And so that's when it was started right around that time. We've worked on a lot of what we call policy dialogues, where we bring together stakeholders, we bring together policy leaders, and we try to find that common ground within those inherent conflicts in federal laws and policies. So the organization is based in Keystone. We have an office up in Keystone, Colorado, and we have an office in Washington, D.C. So we have a fairly active role in those kinds of decisions. Most of our clients are government agencies. We seldom work with industry or with NGOs because they tend to not see this common ground, see the opportunity to search for common ground. They're generally on one side or the other, advocating for a particular issue. And that's not to say that that's also not part of what's going on here, but Pebble, when Pebble approached us with this idea of doing this dialogue and independent science panels, we made it really clear that this is the kind of work that we do and this is the way that we operate. And so we're not, hopefully it's fairly clear by now that we're not helping Pebble get a mine, and we're not helping anybody else either. We're trying to play a neutral, impartial role in this. So Bob continues to be an important leader in the organization in helping us sort of move in that direction. We're often asked why the Keystone Center is undertaking such a controversial project and is accepting funding from the mining company to do it. I think that's a legitimate question. So as I said, the Keystone Center is a nonprofit organization. We're also mission driven, which means that we're looking for projects that where we feel we can make a difference on some level around this idea of collaborative dialogue. So one of the reasons we're doing this is because, as I alluded to a little bit earlier, this is something that really hasn't been done before, and maybe hopefully provide some sort of a model for how science is actually done in a controversial setting like this. So it's I think what our observation is from looking at this more broadly is that science is not at its best in adversarial processes, where it is guarded, used strategically to support values, beliefs, or political positions, or turned into a popularity contest. Science is best when it's done in an objective and transparent environment of shared learning and interaction. And unfortunately, regulatory processes tend to inadvertently force science into sort of polarized positions. So there's an expression that we use for that: for every PhD, there's an equal and opposite PhD, and that's sort of the problem that we're facing. And so that's one of the problems that we're trying to overcome in this. And so to some extent, for the Keystone Center, this is an experiment. What ends up happening in adversarial processes is that it becomes difficult to separate the science from the entities advocating the science, and it makes it all too easy to dismiss the science that the individual organization is advocating, and so people tend to tune that out because of the entities that are advocating that science. So for us, what we're trying to do here is to build a collaborative dialogue around this idea of objective and impartial scientific review. So, but obviously you all are the judge of that, of how well that's working. So for us, the true test of the validity of the science panel process is whether the scientists who are donating dozens of hours of their time to review thousands of pages of material feel that they're compromising their integrity, their reputations, and their reputations of their institutions, and whether our science advisors who have donated hundreds of hours over the last 4 years to help us develop the process feel that they're compromising their integrity, their reputations, and their institutions. So we're working as hard as we can on these challenges, and we're hoping that that you all give us great feedback and through your participation. Let me say a couple of sort of logistical things before I turn the mic over to Charlotte McKay to explain the baseline studies in a little more detail. First, just a couple of kind of logistical ground rules. First, we ask attendees and panel members to be on their best behavior. and to treat each other with respect, understanding, caring, and fairness. We ask this for two reasons. One, because we're on public television and you have to behave well on public television. And two, because we all recognize that this is a difficult and controversial issue for the people of the region and Alaska, and has the potential to divide communities and families. And second, I want to reiterate that the panels are focused on the baseline studies and not on a mine plan or potential impacts of the mine. So they're prepared to answer questions about the baseline studies themselves. They're not prepared to really talk about potential impacts or a mine plan because they haven't seen a mine plan. We have been to the site. We've flown the transportation corridor, so there's some pretty good familiarity with what's on the ground as well as what's in the baseline documents. Third, we do have one gap in this panel that is unfortunate, and we are still promising to fill. We haven't been able to find a scientist that can help us evaluate the baseline studies with regard to large mammals. And large mammals, we know, are a really important part of this whole study. Not without trying, though. And I think what we're going to do is what we did is we relied pretty heavily on people in the field, scientists in the field, to help us identify other scientists who are available. One of the problems that we ran into was with federal sequestration and the inability of federal scientists to actually participate in this process or to some extent travel very much. And that limited our ability to find some people. We found several people who were very interested in joining the panel and helping us, but the timing was not good for them. So I think what we're going to do at this point is follow up with the people who are interested and see if they can do a review of the baseline studies for us and give us written comments. Unfortunately, they won't be part of this discussion, but we do plan to fill that. Before I go on, I want to say a couple other really quick things about one of the other challenges that we face is that this is a very technical discussion, and the Keystone Center is built in having this technical discussion in a very public forum, and we think that's really important. But the downside of that is that a lot of people are exposed to some technical jargon that they're not very familiar with. We think that this will be less of a problem this time than it was in October, because in October we talked about chemistry, and there were lots of eyes glazing over when we talked about chemistry. Now we're going to talk about some chemistry, but we're going to talk more about stuff that I think people are generally familiar with. So, but scientists have a tendency. I've actually had this slide for about 30 years, and I've been looking for an opportunity to use it, and finally I can use it. So, sometimes scientists talk in ways that are not accessible to the public, and so we've asked our scientists to try to talk in ways that are accessible to the public, and if they're not doing that, we want to back up a little bit and have them talk in more accessible terms. So we'll try to do that throughout the 2 days. So the other thing I wanted to do is walk you through, give you a little bit of a sense of the agenda and how we're going to structure these 2 days. So we've basically broken the discussion down into 2 sections. One is on vegetation and wetlands, and the other is on wildlife, and trace elements, and threatened and endangered species. We've broken those 2 sections down into what we're calling sessions, and each session basically has a presentation by. See if this works. I know it did a second ago. I'll find it. We're basically starting with presentations by Pebbles consultants who did the studies or who can represent those studies. They're giving us a basic overview of the chapters that they studied. They're not going into a lot of detail, and if you've looked at or read the chapters, you know that there's a lot of technical detail in those chapters. So in the first part of this, we're going to ask Pebbles consultants to give us those presentations so that there's a context for the discussion. That will probably be followed in each case by a break. Then after the break, we'll come back with the Keystone Center's panel members, and we'll put the panel members up in front, and the panel members and the panel members will ask the consultant questions and engage in a little bit of discussion with the consultants to try to more fully understand what they did in the studies. And we'll do that. That could go on for an hour. It could go on for less than an hour, depending on how many panel members and how detailed a discussion we're getting into. And then we'll have, in this case, we have lunch. This is this morning's session. And then we'll come back and then have a more open discussion with attendees who are here in the room, but also people who are either participating via the web stream on the Keystone Center's website, and I hope people have found that if you're out there, and also on public television. So our contact information will be available. People will email us questions for the panel members, and we will copy those questions and we'll read those to you. So that's the structure for. This is what we'll do in the morning, but that's the structure for the rest of the time that we're together. Then at the very end of the day tomorrow, we'll get all the panel members up in front of the room, and we'll ask them to give you their impressions and their initial recommendations and thoughts about the baseline studies and whether they're sufficient for their intended purpose and whether they believe that they're credible and if there are gaps in the baseline studies, what their basic recommendations are to fill those gaps. After that, the Keystone Center will put together a report that brings in all of those recommendations and any additional recommendations that the panel members might make after they get home and have a chance to think about this for a while. We started that process back in October, and we're actually still working on the recommendations and decided that we would wait till this panel was finished before we actually put it all together in a report and release it. So it'll be released on the Keystone Center's website, and we'll make that fully available to the public. So I'm going to stop here and turn the mic over to Charlotte McKay, who's going to. Before I do that, though, I want to introduce the Keystone Center staff and our Science Advisory Committee, who's helped us work through this over the past 3 or 4 years. So our panel, our staff members are back in the back here. One of them is out in the hall, Nikki, who you met, Nikki Kozalka, who's out in the hall. Susan Klein is back here. Colleen Daywald is back here. Those are 3 Keystone Center staff members. They actually got rear-ended in their van yesterday afternoon, so we're lucky that they're here. It looks like only the van was really hurt, and it wasn't their fault, so that's good. And I want to also introduce our Science Advisory Committee members who are here. Milo Atkinson. Milo is a professor of fisheries at the Juneau Center, School of Fisheries and Ocean Sciences at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Elizabeth Andrews is not here. Elizabeth is the former director of the Division of Subsistence for the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. Elizabeth has helped us on our socioeconomic, cultural, and subsistence reviews. Milo's working on the fisheries and biology reviews. Kirk Nordstrom Kirk is a senior hydrogeochemist with the U.S. Geological Survey. Dr. Philip Verplank is a research geologist with USGS Mineral Resource Team in Denver, and Philip is not here. And Rod Eggert, and Rod's back here. Rod is a professor and director of the Division of Economics and Business at the Colorado School of Mines. So let me go ahead and turn this over to Charlotte.